Precision platformers are simultaneously one of my favourite game genres, and the most frustrating things on the entire planet to me. On one hand, you have some of the most enjoyable gameplay in the world, and the feelings of pride and relief after finishing a difficult level are hard to match. On the other hand, if I don't beat this section soon, I'm gonna have a mental breakdown. Germinal is a game that is all about this sort of gameplay. There are tons of rooms to play through, with all sorts of little Easter eggs and fun things to find. And if you really want a challenge, you can try and collect all of these... apparently they're called ebb tabs, and I have no fucking clue what that is. But given that this game is all about germs, mental health, and disinfecting, I saw them as washing up capsules while playing. The gameplay in Germinal is, for the most part, really satisfying, and nails that whole easy to learn but hard to master idea. All of the rooms feel like there was a whole lot of love and thought put into them, and while they start out easy, so that you have a chance to get a hang of the controls and general gameplay, it's not long before they start ramping up and giving you a real challenge. Like any good precision platformer, when you die, you respawn straight away, which is great because you're going to die a lot. This is partially because the developers wanted this game to appeal to the speedrunning community, and to have the potential to be played at a really fast pace. You die, you're already respawned. You don't want to get the additional collectibles? Forget about them. You don't like this bit of dialogue? See you later, loser. If you want to play through each room at Mach 10, then you absolutely can. But if you want to stop and smell the flowers, the developers didn't forget about you. As I played through the game, I would find all sorts of fun little things to interact with. The big TV helping to build the world a little bit, this giant telescope letting me look at all the constellations, and of course, finding this little guy. Aww. The main mechanic of the game is of course this big jetpack thing strapped onto your back. It's actually a bottle of sanitizer, which lets you do a boost and hover until it runs out. The great thing about this is more so in how the levels are designed, because a lot of the time, you can't just boost or hover your way to victory. You have to be conscious of the amount of fuel that you have left. In some cases, you might need to save enough to collect to safety, in others, you might need to save your single boost until the end, and sometimes you have to avoid using it altogether. Germinal controls pretty well for the most part. On the occasion, I had some issues with accidentally boosting after doing some sort of jump, because they're the same button, and it can sometimes be a little finicky when collecting refills in mid-air. One control issue that I would sometimes have is traversing a couple of little tight areas. Either I would catch myself on a ledge, or I would just barely miss the refill pod. Now, I'm not sure if it's because the actual hitbox moves as they do, or if it's just the animations that are messing with me, but it feels like these things move around a little bit too much. It was only something that I really noticed in certain areas, where you had to do things really precisely, but every now and then, I'd feel pretty thrown off by it, especially since these tended to be in areas where, if you mess up at all, you had to restart. Goodbye, cruel world. Other than this though, everything felt really nice to control. On top of your jetpack, you could do normal jumps, wall jumps, phone jumps, that's going to be expensive, fast falls, and apparently wave dashes. I accidentally did this once and never figured it out again. Thanks for the achievement though. Your movements feel fluid throughout the entire game, and the controls were, dare I say, clean. Now, the time has come where I inevitably compare this game to Celeste. I have seen loads of people calling this game a Celeste clone, and while this game is very obviously extremely similar to Celeste in many ways, I think its differences are just as noteworthy. Celeste was a big inspiration for Germinal. They use a very similar art style for most of the game, the player characters move very similarly, and they use a very similar control scheme. But fundamentally, the game plays out very differently. Greg's jetpack, his name is Greg by the way, isn't even comparable to Madeline's air dash, and every single room has been designed around how the jetpack works, much like how Celeste's levels were designed around Madeline's movement abilities. There are definitely times while playing that this game would give me the same feeling as when I play Celeste, but this isn't because both the games are so similar that if you play one, you've played both. It's because they both inspire this feeling of stress and focus during difficult parts of the game. And when you get to a particularly difficult room, you'll die over and over and over again before finally figuring out what it is you need to do and getting good enough to actually pull it off. The story in Germinal is really unique and it's handled really well. You play as Greg, a medical student with a crippling fear of germs during a pandemic. I think you can see why this might be a problem. I won't completely spoil the story, but as you play through it, you'll see the world as Greg sees it, filled with germs that will kill you the second you touch them. It only hit me right near the end that the name Germinal is probably a mix of germs and terminal. This is how Greg sees germs, and how he lives his life. Your relationships with other characters become more and more strained throughout the game, and as you play, you know that, while Greg isn't meaning to be an arsehole, he is still being one out of fear. Throughout the story, Greg's phobia only gets worse and worse. Things that once worked, like being able to destroy purple germs with his jetpack, are no longer working. And his phobia begins to literally spread, and chases him throughout levels. He becomes more and more isolated until he is given a chance of redemption with those he's hurt. We get to see Greg start to come to terms with his phobia, and watch as he does his best to stop being able to live his life again. Overall, it's a fantastic story, and is woven into the gameplay really well. Different gameplay mechanics will appear and start affecting how you play the game based on the story, and rooms will be designed differently according to that. This is such an immersive method of storytelling. You aren't just watching it unfold, you're playing a key part in it at times. The game's visuals complement all of its other elements nicely. They didn't constantly blow me away, but everything looks really nice. One thing I did notice was how the saturation changes as you play. Everything looks so vibrant and colourful near the beginning, and as you get nearer and nearer to the end of the game, everything has this really washed out look to it. The world is quite literally becoming darker and a less colourful place around Greg as his phobia gets worse. This was something that you really notice as the ending sequence starts up, and the world suddenly starts to look much brighter and more appealing. While I liked how the background of the rooms tended to have this almost psychedelic vibe, with giant floating objects that related to the location Greg was in, I do wish that there were some rooms with a little bit more going on. A lot of the time, rooms would just have the same sort of objects loitering around in the background, and it definitely could have been cool to have some more detail in certain rooms. For example, rooms that you go back to multiple times could potentially be stylized as whatever part of the house that you're in. This could really help give them a more unique identity than the rooms that you only pass through once. That being said though, there is really no harm in the current background. It looks good, and it does a great job of both letting you know where you are story-wise, but also giving the whole area the right feeling and atmosphere. Germinal is, overall, a really great game, and while it isn't the longest game to beat in the world, its story definitely aims for quality over quantity, plus the amount of hidden things and collectibles to get easily beef out its runtime a good amount. The story is one of the more unique ones out there, and works in perfect harmony with its gameplay. Nothing feels like an afterthought or something that took a backseat by any means, but these two elements are by far its best qualities. I loved every minute I played of the game, including the minutes where I wanted to rip out my hair and scream into a pillow, which, to me, signifies a fantastic platformer game.